We're going to talk about how best practices killing creativity. And with me today, I have a best-selling author, a agency owner, and a podcast and content creator, Kath Pay, who I've known for years. We followed each other. Kath, give us your background and give us all everybody would want to know about you.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me first. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you very much, Andrew. It's really, really good. So I have been in the industry now for over 25 years. Started off ESP. I actually had my own ESP and then kind of went, as Andrew said, agency side. And I actually had the very wonderful honor of receiving the 2021 ANA Email Marketing Thought Leader Award as well.
Cool.
Yeah, it was a big year because that's also when I launched the first edition of the book,
Mm-hmm.
and now second edition is on its way.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And when I think of the term best practices, or someone comes to me and says, Andrew, what's the best practice around this? It kind of makes me cringe a little bit. And years ago, I used to use the term best practices lead to mediocrity. And I still kind of hold true with that today, because I think, you know, the term best practices, especially as it relates to email, is deceptive, and in how we use it or how we think about it. And look, you helped choose this topic, and I know you've probably written some articles about it. And I'm curious, when you
Yep.
hear the term, or if I came to you and said, "Hey, Kath, tell me the best practices around X," like, what do you do? What do you think about?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't actually said this myself, but I've read this
Mm-hmm.
because I think it's quite harsh.
Mm-hmm.
But I have read that someone has actually said in the past that, you know, best practices are actually lazy marketing. And I totally understand where they're coming from, because best practices means that you are trying to leverage someone else's learnings, right, to benefit yourself, which is great, except for it's probably not applicable to you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are literally only three, maybe true best practices that I can think of that is applicable to everyone, and they're all about authentication.
Right.
Everything else is completely determined by the brand, the products, the subscribers, the engagement, everything like that. So
Mm-hmm.
we can't just say, oh, well, that's what we should do because that's a best practice. And this is how I do best practices, right? Because
Right.
there's different types of best practices. If you go into the history of them,
Mm-hmm.
like we can take a few. And subject lines, short subject lines, right?
Wise. Yeah.
Always see everyone saying, well, you should do short subject lines. Why
Yeah.
should you do short subject lines? Now, the origin of that came from back in the way, way back when you and I were probably still youngsters, Andrew.
Yeah. Yeah.
AOL was the main provider then, and
Yep.
it used to truncate subject lines.
Yep.
So therefore, the
Yep.
best practice came to make sure you had short subject lines.
Right.
Now, of course, comes along the mobile, and everyone's going, well, that's the reason why, but it isn't the reason why.
No.
There's still so much you can be doing. You
Yeah.
need to understand, you need to be testing, you need to be delving into your data.
Mm-hmm.
So that there is actually what I would call an archaic subject,
Mm-hmm.
an archaic best practice, right? Then
Mm-hmm.
there's other best practices, like a self-serving best practice.
Yes. Oh,
So
yeah.
many years ago,
Yeah.
one study was done by an ESP who will remain nameless. And they found out that the majority of complaints came from, guess what?
Yeah.
Your inactives.
Yeah.
So therefore, what came out of that one report
Yeah.
came the best practice of deleting your inactives. Don't message your inactives, because
Right.
now, why do you think that that was perpetuated? Because it was self-serving, because it helped the
Yes.
ESP
It helped the
right?
ESP because they charge by volume or they charge by how big your list is, yada, yada, yada. Right.
But it also is because they don't want to deal with the spam complaints. They don't want to deal with the bad deliverability. They don't want to deal with the bad reputation of the IP
Sure.
address.
Sure. Sure.
So they kind of just shoot you straight to this is what you should do. So that there's so many different types. I could go through and list a whole bunch of them,
Yeah.
and I've gone and basically bucketed them into these type of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I always say, to answer your very first question for me, what do I say when someone comes to me and says about best practices? And I say, well, listen, if Andrew tells you something, or if I tell you something,
Right.
I would encourage you to test it.
Mm-hmm.
And best practices are no different.
Right.
Test it, delve into your data, see if it's applicable for you, understand the origins,
Mm-hmm.
and don't just latch onto it blindly and say, oh, it's a best practice, so therefore,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
need to do it. Because I literally have seen so many best practices implemented, and they've trashed
Trash.
the
Total.
revenue or the
Total.
base or anything.
I kind of agree with you that I call them fundamental best practices, right? Fundamentally, you got to have an infrastructure in order to send email, right? So the right infrastructure, the right technology in order to do it.
Yep.
Ultimately, like authentication, right? And then you start getting into the gray areas of how you acquire email addresses from fundamentally, depending upon your business. But there are fundamental best practices, and then there are best practices that are generated for your own organization. Like we've consistently done this for the years, and we've tested into it a multitude of times, and nothing has changed. The one best practice question that I have received a lot before in the past, and will literally pull out a list. Someone asked me, what's the best day and time to send an email? And that, I'm sure you've gotten that question. I
Yeah.
roll my eyes at it. I don't want to sound like a snob when I say this, but I did a study. I did an own independent Andrew Cordex study, and I think I found 42 different days and times, all different various ways of how they said this is what your engagements would look like on the days and times to send email. And so when you think about someone asked that best practice, there's so many different ways to answer that question. And then the whole it depends, sort of thing kind of comes in, but there isn't. It's like someone said, if I figured that out, I wouldn't be talking to you today, right? Like,
Exactly. You'd be on your
ah,
million-pound boat or something.
totally. If you strive to do what everybody else is doing, you're just striving to do what everybody else is doing. And so
Exactly.
when we use the term, though, killing creativity,
Yeah.
right, in our industry, you
Yeah.
have these people who have the in the box way of doing things. And
Yes.
then you have the potential heretics, right? That'll say,
Yes.
do this, and then everybody else will jump on them, or do this, and everybody else will jump on them. And then they're
Mhm.
sort of branded as these heretics outside that of the term of best practices. Has there something that you said in your career that I'm sure has pissed a lot of people off, or that maybe went against the typical best practice, and what happened?
Yes, yes, yes. I actually have written, because I come across this quite a lot, because I introduce new and potentially contentious ideas.
Mm-hmm.
When I say ideas, I mean they're concepts that I have tested and proven, like you said, right?
Sure.
So and but I present them as being ideas because I don't want them to be, here's a fundamental best practice that you must be, right? This is an idea for you to delve into your database, do a test on, and see if it's relevant for you. So
Mm-hmm.
I actually wrote an article called Purists versus Pragmatists.
Ooh.
Mm.
I
Because
can't remember if I've read that one, but it sounds intriguing, right?
yes, because I come across so many purist marketers who are just sort of like, this is how you do it. It's just and
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, all creativity is taken away from that at all.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, also business sense is taken away too, right?
Yep.
Let's be
Yep.
pragmatic and understand that we have got business goals, and so
Mm-hmm.
let's get creative around what we have, what we can work with.
Right.
So
Right.
But the main one that I've always had issues with is, I guess I have in the past and still am
Mm-hmm.
fairly. I don't want to say anti because that's not strong. That's not true. I'm not pro double opt-in. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Some businesses need it, right? If you've got bad deliverability, if
Okay.
you're, sort of in pharmaceuticals, or if you're in,
Mm-hmm.
the financial sector and things like that, right? So some you have to do it, but the
Mm-hmm.
majority of it's like a retailer. You don't need to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so and I go and I've written about, I don't know how many articles about this,
Mm-hmm.
and spoken a lot about it too. And um, so with the double opt-in, it's like there's pros and cons, and I list them all out, and I
Right.
just give them the facts, because there are so many people that just go, we must do double opt-in, we must do double opt-in, and they don't realize what the downsides, they don't realize
Mm-hmm.
what it is that they're potentially missing out on by
Mm-hmm.
opting for that so-called best practice of double opt-in.
Right.
So yeah,
And
yeah,
then you'll have people who will argue until the day they die that everybody should be double opt-in, confirmed opt-in, and that every business needs it or wants it, or potentially suffer the consequences as a result of that. And I have a fundamental disagreement with people who take the hard line
yes.
on anything. And part of that, I think, has to do with I'd like to think out the box, just like you. But one of the things that I've advised people in the past is don't be a jackass, right? When you do stuff, right? Like don't go completely off brand or do something that's so incredibly wild that it'll eventually get you in trouble or piss off your subscribers or do something different. Gradually do it, but think differently as to how some of these other people are thinking. I once had a client that wanted to do a horizontal email on Black Friday
Mm-hmm.
without testing it. I was like, look, great idea.
Yeah.
Probably not the place you're going to want to test something like that. They
Yes.
went ahead with it anyway, failed miserably, right? And so there's that whole thing. So stay in the box till it's time to test into that box. But do you think there's that hard line thing, and then we start talking about killing creativity? Does that make our industry, or does that make the marketing channel of email boring?
Okay, so whenever I talk about best practices, I also refer to this, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Because we put everything in context. Why are we so focused on best practices? Why are we wanting to latch onto them? Why are they so important to us? Because as email marketers, they are. They're
Mm-hmm.
massively important. You
Yeah.
can see it, in forums all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
The reason is that because we are underappreciated, undervalued, and overworked as
Mm-hmm.
a channel. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
therefore we are trying to take those shortcuts, and we're
Yeah.
and so because we're wanting to do a good job, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it's you kind of going around it the wrong way, really. But that is therefore because we don't have the time, therefore, to be creative
Mm-hmm.
in
Yeah.
our solution, to fully
Mm-hmm.
understand, or we think that we don't. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
spent a lot of my time I'm putting together a business case now for a client, testing things out, putting together business cases, and showing them how they can actually get more money, make more money, and all the rest of
Mm-hmm.
it. It's a lovely, lovely circle. But a
Yeah.
lot of marketers, email marketers, think that they're trapped in what they have. So what I have now is what I'm going to have, and I can't do anything more, and I can't test anymore because I don't have enough time, and so I can't make any more money, and blah blah blah, and all the rest of it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that's when that vicious cycle starts, and they look for that bulletproof, sort of, or
Yep.
lovely silver bullet as such, answer, which is in the form of a best practice. So
Mm-hmm.
it is a shame about the creativity, because email is one of these channels. Think about it. We're a push channel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we can go out to our entire database. We can go
Mm-hmm.
out to special segments, loyal
Yep.
segment, youth segment, everything like that. And we can be testing, asking them. I like to treat every email as a survey, right? So we're
Mm-hmm.
asking them a question, and we're finding out what they like about it. So we can be creative in that respect as well. But because we're a push channel means that we're very, very powerful.
Yep.
And we don't appreciate the power of that channel as much as we should.
Right.
And I think that's once we actually latch onto that and understand that, then that's when the creative juices will flow, because then we
Right.
understand that we're not waiting for someone to come to us. I mean, they're coming to their inboxes, but they're going to be coming to the inbox anyhow because email is so loved.
Right.
So I think it's just, yes, the limitations that we put on ourselves and also the limitations that are put on us by the C-suite, because this is another thing, right?
Yeah, totally. I always use this story. I was flying one day. I was sitting next to somebody and they said, well, what do you do for a living? And I said, well, I'm in email marketing. And immediately that person's face changed from this to this. And they said, so you're one of those people.
Yeah, yeah.
I said, excuse me, what do you mean by one of those people? She's like, you're the one who floods my inbox with spam. And so the general attitude of email marketing in general has negative connotations, yet it's insanely successful. It's insanely profitable. And why we, as people who you've been in it 25 years, 20 plus, I've been in it for 24 plus years, people like you and me who have stood the test of time, it's a very easy out sort of channel. People could get into it, do it, and then sort of move on. But more importantly is, they're not standing up and saying, I'm an email marketer. And so that kind of roots back to, well, we just need to stick into our best practices tunnel, right? Do what we need to do, what's always been done, or well, this is the way we've always done it. And so we're getting, we're incrementally increasing, even if it's minor every year.
Yeah.
And that's that vicious cycle, right? That we keep talking about. And then somebody comes in like you or me and says, I think we got to tear this thing down and we got to do something a little bit different in order to, innovate iteratively to make your program better. And that may not be the actual use of best practices. And oftentimes you'll see the person nodding, right? And oftentimes, in their head, they're going, no way am I able to do this, right? There's no way, right? And it's a scary prospect.
So I can tell you, so I do audits for my clients, right? And I can tell you probably 9 out of 10 audits, I will tell them that they're undersending. I believe that they're undersending. So let's go and put that to the test. And guess what? They've been proven. We do a frequency test. We run it over a period of months and we find out. I've just done one for a client and they were sending twice a month. They're a travel company. And I said, well, let's try sending 4 times a month, right? Because you want more revenue. Yeah, okay, great. So we went and did it and the results were phenomenal. Now, the thing is that if you say that, and that's their expression is every time I say, you need to send more, and they go like this, because it's going against everything that they've ever been told.
Sure.
You need to be treating it like, with kid gloves, and you don't want to be, sort of pushing too much. But the bottom line is, from a business perspective, everything has that tipping point. You need to be testing to find out what that tipping point is. Don't go over the tipping point, because that's when you'll get, increased unsubscribes and you'll start losing out and everything. But there's, so I totally get what you're saying about we marketers sort of just going, let's just stay safe. Let's just keep.
And part of that is the notion of complacency in their program. If they know that they're going to have a job at the end of the year because they've incremental or even out revenue, it's a channel, it's a cheap channel. We only pay X number of cents per thousands that we send, right? So let's just kind of keep the train rolling without really doing any experimentation for the fear that we're going to screw it up. And that's where you have to sort of prove it in the data, prove it in the numbers, and have these things that can basically say, if you do this, this is what we can expect based off of Y, my history, everything that I've ever done in my career. And they're either gonna latch on or they're not, right? And I think that's both sad and both enlightening when you have clients that are like, all right, Andrew, or all right, Kath, I trust you, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
let's
yeah.
do it. And that's the
No,
best.
they do. Mine actually sort of when they got the result, they went, oh. Because it meant more work for them. But then I'm telling them, listen, look at the revenue. The revenue was like more than double.
Right.
Right? No more unsubscribes or anything like that. Look at this revenue. Now all you have to do is put together, you
Mhm.
should get another team member,
Right.
right? Because
Right.
I don't believe this is the tipping point. I believe you can send even more, but that's
Right.
for another time. We're going to just
Yeah.
keep for now.
And that's where you can prove your worth, and you can prove that you can do other cool stuff like invest in other types of technology that are the bright shiny stars, or another individual or headcount to help you do other things. The goal is to make them feel, or to make them feel like they're making leaps as
Yes.
opposed to just small tiny steps. So Kath, we're running out of time. What I'd love for you to do is, what are some of the main points that you want to get across as it relates to, and I'm going to use air quotes, everybody here, best practice?
Okay, my main points are basically whenever you read anything that's framed as being a best practice,
Yeah.
question it.
Yep.
Look into the origin,
Mm-hmm.
and just understand it and say, okay, is that really a best practice? Is it archaic? Is it self-serving? What's it all about? And is it
Mm-hmm.
applicable to me? And if you believe it is applicable, then go and delve into your data, go
Mm-hmm.
or at the very, very least, go and do a test doing
Mm-hmm.
it. But never, ever, ever, please, 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 never, ever blindly implement a best practice.
It's good
And that's
advice.
something like authentication, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Don't mess around with authentication, people, right? Because that's fundamental to your
Yes.
success. I'm still going to stick with the best practices lead to being a mediocre marketer.
Yeah.
Historically, I know some people will vehemently disagree with me, and that's fine. We can disagree and we can be respectful about it. But don't strive for mediocrity. Strive for to say, I just don't want to do what the minimum of everyone says I should do, which is literally the best practice. It's what can I do that's outside that to learn, to fail, to succeed as a result of that. And I think that whether you're a marketer that's done it for 10 years, 15 years, or are just brand new to this industry, that's the best advice that two people with our length of time in this industry could say. As always, everybody, I wanted to thank Kath. I know you're really busy, and I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule. I highly encourage you to, we'll have all of her details on this podcast. You can reach out to her on LinkedIn. You can buy her book on Amazon, which I highly would recommend anybody at any level with any levels of experience, because there's a learning for everybody. Listen to her podcast, follow Holistic Marketing. I think it's a phenomenal opportunity for everybody. And I'll say this not to butter you up, Kath, before I give you the final word, but I follow you, and I learn from you, and I'm inspired by you. And so thank you so much for all that you do for this industry, because this guy here has learned a lot over the years. So thank you. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. Well, let me tell you, the feeling's mutual too. So I have huge respect for you, and I learn heaps from you too. So it's
Great.
good. And thank
Great.
you so much for having me on. It was a fun discussion. I knew it would be because we just always like talking about email.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's
Um,
good.
as always, everybody, thank you for supporting Email Never Sleeps. Keep on emailing, but try something new, everybody. Really try something new, and you'll see it. Thanks again, Kath, and thank you to everybody.